So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
So Amazon Prime is coming out with a Lord of the Rings series. Did you know this? And some news has come out about the Lord of the Rings series that is receiving quite a bit of backlash from Tolkien fans, maybe even those nerds who know a little too much about Middle-earth and Elvish. Maybe you were that person. If I'm calling you a nerd here, I'm sorry. My husband's one. I love books. I read Lord of the Rings. I'm just not quite one of you, okay? I'm not quite there. We'll talk about that in just a moment here. I'm really excited for today's guest. So he is a retired lieutenant colonel, and his name's Dave Grossman of the United States Army. And we're going to be talking about violence, video games, boys, young men, the impact that media has had, and how we've seen this increase in aggression in the culture. He wrote a number of books talking about the psychology of killing. He actually trains law enforcement individuals. But one of his more recent books over the last couple of years is titled Assassination Generation, Video Games, Aggression, and the Psychology of Killing. This will be a fascinating conversation, so don't go away. Dave Grossman will join me in just a little bit to discuss. Also, there's been a trend surrounding babies. In terms of how many babies were born in December, those COVID babies, were there more, were there less? I can tell you I'm totally guilty. I have a quarantine baby, TMI, but you know, I made all these jokes as soon as the quarantine started about how there was going to be this baby boom, and I'm part of that statistic. But has there been a baby boom or has there not? We will be getting to that in just a little bit. If you'd like to join the conversation today, the number's 1-888-914-9149. And also, if you have a question for my guests, you can go ahead and ask your question there or on my Instagram, where I've put up in just a moment here a question box. But I want to get to this story about Amazon Prime. So cool. They're creating a Lord of the Rings story. A series. I mean, talk about how fans, I'm sure, are so excited to see this. Here's the problem. Why is it that a story that had no nudity, no sexuality, intimacy in it, is suddenly being, I guess we could say, Game of Thrones-ified? You know, it's so frustrating because there are stories out there that I would love to watch, listen to, and so forth, but they end up having components of sexuality, pornographic, even in reading them, that isn't palatable for someone of a Christian faith. And some may say, oh, you're just being prudish. I'll get to that in a little bit. But here's what's sad. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the story. It's not written into it. It's not in the books. It's not in the other movies. They're just bringing this sexed up element to the story for the sake of selling the story more to those people who really want that content. But here's the reality. People will watch the Lord of the Rings series regardless of there being nudity in it. Regardless of there being intimate moments and visuals between the characters. So why do it? That's what's so confusing. We are at the point where stories that have nothing of that effect have suddenly implemented this part of the story into it. And I can't understand why this seems necessary to Hollywood. You know, this is semi-different from, for example, Game of Thrones. I wanted so badly to watch Game of Thrones. I never watched a single episode. Why? Because I knew a lot of the sexual element that was implemented. And then I heard more about the actual story, and that's actually at the heart of the story itself in Game of Thrones. I mean, incest is at the heart of the entire story. Rape is there. And yet people watch this as part of their entertainment. I haven't been able to understand that. And in fact, I did a whole episode where Father Tim Grumbuck and I a while back actually talked about this. Why is it that so many people justify watching Game of Thrones? And I actually did buy the book, the first book, a number of years ago. I read like maybe the first 10 pages. You guys, from page 1, Game of Thrones is very provocative in terms of the male author and the way he talks about women and their bodies. And it wasn't just something where you could skip it. It was there. It was prevalent. It was constant. I returned it or maybe threw it in the trash. I don't throw books in the trash. That's a big deal. I may have thrown it in the trash if I didn't return it. So this is a big difference between Game of Thrones and, let's say, Lord of the Rings, where Game of Thrones is written into the story. Does that justify watching it? No. I can't quite understand that trend behind Game of Thrones. Now, there's another example. The Tudors. I always wanted to watch The Tudors. But The Tudors is another example of something that had so much provocative content in it. And so here's the question. We have to find that balance, and I don't even think it's a balance. I think it's a self-awareness between being prudish, between being a prude and being prudent with what we read, listen to, and watch. And this upcoming series of Lord of the Rings, I think, is going to be a challenge for Catholics because there's a whole number of groups of Catholics and people of faith who love the Lord of the Rings world, and they're going to want to watch the series. But y'all, it's a no for us, dog. Like, if this is going to continue to be a part of the story, then we need to be very much so aware of the fact that this exposure is continuing to participate in the pornified culture that we're in. And I think that this ties into, in just a couple minutes, we're going to be talking with my guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, because we see a real challenge in our culture with young men, this aggression in young men. And part of the issue is pornography as well. We're going to talk about it from the perspective of video games and others, but there's a problem when we turn young boys essentially into machines who constantly receive images in front of them but are told they can't do anything with it. And I'm not saying that, like, we should be encouraging sexual intimacy or grooming people or trying to get them to, settle down in terms of their sexuality by placating them with porn. But there's a problem with this porn exposure continues to build up these desires within young boys and relief in the wrong type of ways, that it creates confusion about sexuality, about even taking action, interacting with women and other people. It's making for a whole lot of very awkward and even awkward relationship-wise individuals. So here's the challenge. I think that we have this opportunity to really work on being prudent in terms of the content that we consume. Instead of looking at yourself as, well, I don't want to be that prude, that goody two-shoe, I don't want to be stuck up. Think about yourself as being reverent toward yourself, your mind, your body, toward the people in the movies, the various characters, the people who play those, even though they may be choosing to participate in certain types of scenes, choose to show them reverence when they don't even show it for themselves. Don't give your eyeball power to be a consumer of these movies and content. This is an opportunity to practice chastity, faith, and especially detachment. And so as we start to kind of move toward Lent, this is an opportunity today to start taking stock of what media we consume. Everything from article content, news content, to books, audiobooks. Are you maybe kind of attached to your audiobooks to make you feel good? Are you attached to certain shows because they create some sort of arousal within you? This is the challenge now when we have a new movie, new TV series coming out every day. Yet we kind of have this attitude, well, I don't want to miss my show. I need my time to watch my shows. Well, it's really fascinating how much time we waste on our shows or our things that we want to enjoy. Yet our justification for our time also leads into our justification for the types of things that we're consuming. This made me think of something Jesus Christ said in Matthew chapter 12, where he talks about an impure spirit being present and how the impure spirit is cast out. But what happens when we don't fill up the space of those things that are banished from our lives? Well, Jesus actually says that the house was swept, everything's cleaned out. But here's the thing. All of a sudden, 7 spirits come back that are more wicked than the first to live there. Because although everything might be cleaned out, we fail to fill ourselves sometimes with our Lord Jesus Christ. We fail to fill our idle time with things that edify us, that build us up, that made us stronger. And so what happens? The habit comes back and it's even worse. Or maybe it's a worse habit than was there before. And so I challenge you, replace those things that you need to replace. Read, exercise, pray, go to daily mass in the evening rather than watching all of my shows that I have the right to watch because I need some me time. Go sit outside, stare at a wall. On Monday, we talked about 5 things that could make you happier today. And I was laughing so hard because you know what one of those were? One of them was studies are out there saying that if you watch nature videos for 10 minutes a day, it helps to relieve stress and all these other great things to make you happy. Can we just get outside and sit on a picnic bench and look at the trees at the building next to us? So I challenge you. Do your daily examination of conscience. Make that act of contrition. Examine where you're at and what things you can detach from so that you can do better at attaching to the right relationships you need in your life, especially our Lord Jesus Christ. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. It's great to be with you. If you'd like to share this episode or subscribe to the podcast, head over to relevantradio.com/trending where you can subscribe on your favorite application, including the Relevant Radio app. My guest today I'm so excited about is Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman of the United States Army. He's a retired lieutenant colonel. He's written a number of books. The first book I listened to of his was on killing with my husband. He's a huge fan, talking about the psychology of killing. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman actually trains law enforcement as well. And he wrote a book a couple years ago called Assassination Generation, Video Games, Aggression, and the Psychology of Killing. Welcome to the show, Lieutenant Grossman. It's great to have you.
Hello, Timmerie. It's my pleasure. And my most recent book, praise God, came out less than a year ago, was on spiritual combat. It's kind of a partner on killing, on combat, on spiritual combat. And in the end, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And kind of take a look at it on Amazon. It's got less than a year, hundreds, 5-star reviews, average 5 stars. You know, it's kind of like a 4.0 GPA, 1B, and you never get it back again. You know, we got 5 stars, hundreds of reviews on spiritual combat. And I'm so eager to talk with you. I'm so glad you mentioned the assassination generation. I think there's something we can talk about that will save lives right now. And it's an aspect to the intrusive media. It's an aspect to the addictive video games and their impact on our children. And that is a global epidemic of sleep deprivation. Just do an online search for that. Global epidemic of sleep deprivation. It is a major cause of suicide. I've lost 2 nephews and a brother to suicide across the years. Suicides have exploded. They're one of the major killers of our kids. Some of the military research tells us a sleep-deprived soldier can be up to 5 times more likely to take their life. And what these things are doing, it first and foremost, that nobody can deny, is they're stealing us sleep. The head of Netflix said their number one competitor was not other providers, it was sleep. The corporate policy of Netflix is to steal your sleep. And sleep deprivation makes you stupid. It impairs judgment. 18 hours without sleep, and your impaired judgment equal to 0.08 legally drunk. 24 hours without sleep, and your impaired judgment at 0.10 above legally drunk. 2 nights without sleep, and you're psychotic. Any graduate of Army Ranger School will tell you about hallucinations on the 3rd day without sleep. And so, you know, these video games, you know, we all kind of remember Tetris. Think Tetris on steroids with crack. And each generation of games is more addictive and more immersive. Now, my book on spiritual combat, we got the brain scan data in there. These games put the kids in a fight or flight mode, but they also put them in what's called a flow state. They're incapable of keeping track of time. A lot of us have been there. Suddenly it's 4 o'clock in the morning. We got no idea where the last 6 hours went. We got to be working 2 hours. And oh, by the way, your spouse is really ticked off. Research tells us video games are responsible for at least 15% of all divorces in America. The spouse says, what's more important? What's more important, the game or your family? That's easy. Divorce. And so just understand this intrusive media and its role in suicide. Suicides worldwide have exploded. Teen suicides, they call them teenagers. 10, 11, 12-year-old teenage girls' suicide have tripled per capita in America in just the last decade. So I teach cops. I teach every federal agency, cops in all 50 states. And during a break, a cop came up to me. He said, I had a good girl. And this is all in my book on spiritual combat, everything we're going to talk about here. He said, I had a good girl. She was an A student. She said, Dad, it's embarrassing. You don't have to take my cell phone every night. You can trust me. He says, I trust her. I let her keep her cell phone. And then a while later, she took her life. He said, my little girl took her life. And we never knew the hell she was living in until we looked at the text messages on her cell phone. Night after night of ceaseless, relentless, vicious bullying. And you can't just ignore that stuff. We're not wired that way. She's up all night long trying to defend herself, night after night, trying to find somebody to stand up for her. He said, I knew my little girl was bullied to death. What I didn't understand until now, she was sleep deprived, tormented, and bullied to death in front of my eyes, and I let it happen. He said, I can't ignore that text message in the middle of the night. How can we expect our kids to? He said, the one thing on earth I could have done for my little girl was take her cell phone every night and let her turn off all the bad stuff in this world. Yeah. We have got to protect our children's sleep. Now, the three major killers of our kids, suicide, traffic deaths, number 2. Number 1, 2, depending who you talk to. There's a reason why truck drivers and airline pilots are required to get enough sleep. One of the major predictors of traffic deaths is sleep deprivation. I had 3 teenage boys. Now I got teenage grandchildren. I knew at that time that traffic deaths were the thing most likely to kill my kids. So I made sure they wore their seatbelts, they got good training, and I made sure didn't have a lot of financial resources, but they all had beater cars, but they all had airbags. 2 out of 3 tested those airbags. Nobody told me the most important thing they're going to give those kids is demand a good night's sleep before they get behind the wheel of a vehicle, like a truck driver and airline pilot. It's the law for them, and there's a reason for it. The third major killer that has exploded worldwide, traffic deaths, suicides, have exploded. Decade after decade, we brought traffic deaths down, airbags, seatbelts, medical technology. Now everywhere they're back up again. The third major factor is drug overdoses, especially opiates. The opiate epidemic. Sleep deprivation creates chronic pain. The tendons and muscles never chance. Again, do another online search, chronic pain and sleep deprivation. Boom, it comes up. The muscles and tendons never get a chance to fully relax.
But also emotionally as well. Yeah, I mean, emotionally as well, we see that it creates mental anguish, anxiety, depression. And people we see all these diagnoses of autoimmune diseases right now occurring with people. Well, a lot of the root of it is adrenal function, that fight or flight mode, our cortisol, our cortisone levels. I mean, young people that shouldn't be dealing with that type of anxiety and depression are. And as you said, you've had family members who have died as a result of suicide. I have as well. And it's to see that sleep deprivation is a part of this, to see the connection to video games. The question I think is, why has this continued to go on without a wider conversation about it?
Yeah. Well, why can Netflix, the head of Netflix, say our corporate policies that steal your sleep? Because Apple's never going to tell you your kid doesn't need a cell phone. And you should take that cell phone away when they go to bed. The head of Netflix is never going to tell you you need 8 hours of sleep as an adult to have a healthy life. You need to turn your TV off now. They're never going to do that. In the video game industry, the one thing on the video games is absolutely limit their time, cut it off several hours before they go to bed, and enforce the rating systems. I've got a piece of my book on Assassination Generation, talks about the rating systems, many lies for the price of one. Congress told them they had to do a rating system. This evil, creative, ingenious video game industry could create their own rating systems, but there is some stuff of value in there. And the one game many parents know about is Fortnite. Hyper addictive, hyper violent. The child is in a constant fight or flight innervation. It takes several days for the fight or flight hormones to flush out of the brain. The game is rated T, 13 and above only. If you have children below the age of 13 playing Fortnite, you tell them the people who made the game say you shouldn't be playing it. They rated it T. Now, hopefully, our standard is higher than the standard of this evil industry. But right. As a bare minimum, enforce the rating systems, limit the time, and understand this, deep in your soul, violent visual imagery inflicted upon children makes fight or flight hormones flood through their body. We've got brain scan data. Violent movies, violent television, we're impacted by it, and especially the violent video games. As adults, we're impacted. Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up. Children go into a fight or flight mode. And so it takes days for those fight or flight hormones to flush out. The research tells us it takes about 2 days. Church camps worldwide tell me nothing spiritual happens in this church camp for the first 2 days. On the third day, it's like somebody threw a switch. All the fight or flight hormones have finally flushed out of their brain. So realize what this stuff is doing. The one thing nobody can deny, the thing that can save lives starting tonight. And when we get back from the break, I would like to talk about healthy sleep and quality sleep. A couple of nuggets that parents can apply right now to protect their children from the 3 major killers. And that's traffic deaths, opiate overdoses, and suicides. And proper caffeine use is part of that equation. Sleeping in a totally dark room, or as dark as humanly possible. Keeping them on the same sleep cycles. These are things we can do right now to help our kids and us as adults to lead that healthy life that a loving God and the Lord Jesus Christ wants for us. We got a whole article. Jesus needed sleep. Jesus was on the boat sleeping, and
he's God and he slept.
Said, he said, you see Jesus getting up this groggy sleep, saying, "Be still" to the waves, and he goes back to sleep.
That's Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman here. We'll be back in just a moment to talk more about the impact of screen time on our boys and young men. We'll talk about spiritual combat and also about becoming resilient, especially for young men, in addition to some sleep tips. I'll be right back here on Trending. If you have a question, head over to my Instagram now to ask that question or give us a call. I'll give you that number when we come right back. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio Studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
If you'd like to join the conversation, the number is 1-888-914-9149. I've also thrown up on my Instagram story a question box. If you have a question for my guest, he's a retired Lieutenant Colonel, Dave Grossman. He's written a number of books, including his most recent, Spiritual Warfare, Spiritual Combat. Another one that we are talking a lot about today actually is violence in video games. It's titled Assassination Generation, Video Games Aggression, and the Psychology of Killing. He named just a little bit ago the 3 main things that are killing young people today, especially young boys: suicides, traffic deaths, and the opioid overdose epidemic that people are experiencing, all connected to this issue of lack of sleep. It creates chronic depression, anxiety, physical pain in the body. And so we're going to dive in now on how we can work more toward getting better sleep, but also how to become kind of that person who has a more resilient character in a culture that you'd think doesn't have a lot of resilience, but we don't realize how much is being thrown, especially at young people and young boys today. So, Lieutenant Colonel, what's your immediate kind of solution to this sleeplessness other than just getting good sleep for young people?
Absolutely. Number one, Teach your children to sleep in the dark. Adults, you got to sleep in the dark. Sleep with a sleep mask. I just had a grandson go to college, and my gift to him was a sleep mask, and this promise from him that he would use it. Babies are sloshing with melatonin. Babies can sleep anywhere. As we get older and older, the body produces less and less melatonin. By the time we become teenagers, it becomes very important that they sleep in a dark room. You know, I'm a huge science geek. The major study in the sleep lab, a totally dark room, bathroom light is on and the door is shut. Just the light coming out of the crack of the bathroom door is enough light to stop your body from producing the melatonin that you need. And try very hard to stay on cycle. Go to bed generally the same time every night. Don't vary it, on weekends much more than an hour or two. What they do is they stay up all night long, Friday night, Saturday night, playing video games, and when do they sleep? The next day when the sun's coming in the window. They're getting bad sleep, bad quality sleep. So train yourself to sleep in the dark. Think about sleeping with the sleep mask. For us right now, and remember, as adults and teenagers, we need about 8 hours of sleep, number one. Number two, cut off all caffeine shortly after lunch. We are in the middle of a worldwide epidemic of caffeine addiction. And, I was on another podcast with an awesome Catholic guy doing it. He talked about how he was pounded down these energy drinks, and he went cold turkey, and they called an ambulance for him. He was going into withdrawal. He went into a coma. He wasn't even able to speak to them. If you cut off caffeine, and you start to have any withdrawal symptoms, and that's what's happening. You cut off caffeines, irritability, anxiety, those are withdrawal symptoms. So cut off caffeine shortly after lunch. And the energy drinks that these kids are pounding down are condensed poison. Our armed forces have been at war for 20 years now. For the first 15 years, we passed out energy drinks like water. They gave them to us, we gave them to the troops. And then 5 years ago, 2 major Department of Defense-wide studies on the energy drinks. Today, there is, for all practical purpose, a complete ban on issuing energy drinks in the armed forces.
And parents need to hear this, that there's a ban in the military service on energy drinks. They're like
cigarettes. They're like alcohol. You're an adult. We're not going to stop it. We're never going to buy them for you. In an academic environment, the one take most energy drinks were the ones with the worst grades. In a tactical environment, the one take most energy drinks were the ones most likely to nod off on the job. All there is in that stuff is a mega dose of caffeine and sugar and some stuff that will make you metabolize it quickly. Before a PT test, not every day before your workout, before a PT test, before an athletic event, one energy drink might not be a bad idea, but the second one does no good whatsoever. It just increases your addiction to caffeine. Sodas and diet sodas, they're like candy bars. One candy bar a day is not going to kill you. If it's your only form of nutrition, your only form of hydration, you got a problem. Coffee and tea appear to be pretty good for us. I think coffee drinkers, tea drinkers doing so well just because the other stuff is so bad.
Right.
But a cup or two of coffee at breakfast or tea, cup or two of coffee, tea at lunch, then switch to decaf and have all you want.
Right.
But it's truly dark room. Caffeine is a powerful addictive drug that has to be used responsibly. And when our kids are pounding this stuff down, combined with these sleep cycles, it shouldn't be a surprise to us that traffic deaths, suicides, and opiate overdoses have exploded.
Absolutely. And some people think, well, maybe I should stop drinking my Diet Coke at night. I think that's a yes, among other things. But perhaps you want to make a change. You don't necessarily stop cold turkey. Lent's coming up, and maybe that's what you're giving up for good beyond Lent. Start now. Slowly ease into it. And Lieutenant Colonel, I know you mentioned the light at night. And I think this is really important because I'm one of those people growing up. If someone had like a night light, when I stay the night at someone's house, I'd be like, can we please unplug the night light? I can't sleep. I fixate on the night light. Even in our room, if there's the light from the fire detector. The fire detector light. I have to put little taped up but sticky notes over the top of it because I fixate.
Fire Department New York brings me out several times a year. It's an honor to work with those guys. And of course, they sleep in the firehouse. And they have what they call the light Nazi, the guy that just absolutely says, I can't stand any light. And now I tell him, that guy's right. He's not the light Nazi. He's the guy that's getting quality sleep. Listen to him. This is such a little thing you can do right now.
Yeah, that was one of the new marriage struggles. When we got married, my husband didn't mind, some of the little lights. I'm like, no, we got to have perfectly dark room. The only thing is the moon. That's the only thing I can handle.
It's a blessing. And that's the way it has been throughout human history. Untold thousands of years, every night it got dark. Here's the thing to understand, that sleep is a biological blind spot. Our bodies are good at making us get the right amount of food. If a kid puts on 1 extra pound a month, by the time he's 10, he's 120 pounds overweight. Our bodies are pretty amazing at getting the right amount of air, food, water. But our bodies don't know how to make us get enough sleep because it always happened naturally. At untold thousands of years, all there was the moon. In a hut, in a cave, through the leaves, in a tree, that's all there ever was. Right. And so, and even that was filtered, in a hut, in a cave, And so understand that teach your children, by the time they're teenagers, to truly sleep in the dark, do it yourself. And I'm a big fan of a sleep mask. Sometimes you could just never cut out all the sleep. And if your sleep cycles, you get a chance to sleep in late, you should do it. It's the only way you can catch up on sleep, catch a couple hours. But wear that sleep mask so that when you're sleeping on through the morning, you're getting your 8 hours of sleep, but they're quality 8 hours because you're wearing that sleep mask. In the armed forces, we're passing these sleep masks out to the troops like candy, big fistful of them out. But really, go online and buy one of the nice ones. You can look at the reviews and find some good ones and get that quality sleep.
That's Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He's written a number of books on combat, spiritual warfare. He's written especially about the impact of video games on our young boys. We'll be sure to link to some of those books. But Lieutenant Colonel, I would love to get your thoughts. We've seen this increase in aggression among young boys and men in particular. And it's interesting to see kind of their inability to cope, whether we've seen, the Black Lives Matter protests across the nation. We've seen just this outright anarchy in many states and cities. And it begs the question, how do young men and how do young boys learn resilience in a culture that tells them that they can whine and complain and kick over a statue if they're offended over the slightest thing?
Every armed forces on the planet are teaching what we call resiliency. I was the keynote speaker at the first Department of Defense-wide resiliency conference. And one of the pillars of resiliency is faith. That it's irrefutable scientific data that when we say what allowed you to sustain yourself during these terrible times, and faith comes up over and over again. Do not neglect that. Raise them in their faith. And then the other dynamic is the ability to face challenges and overcome them. First, set limits. Set limits. You sleep time every night. That's a discipline. One area of resiliency is don't hit that snooze alarm. The snooze alarm, evil little button, makes you relive the worst part of every day over and over again. And the first act of every day, am I in charge of my body? Is my body in charge of me? Set your cell phone for 10 alarms. 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock. By the time you turn them all off, you're up. And the most, give a kid a marshmallow. Eat this marshmallow right now, but I'll be back in 3 minutes for another one. You don't eat it. You'd have them both. That is one of the greatest predictors of success in life.
Excellent
It's called
study.
self-control.
Yeah.
And it's about self-control, teaching them to have self-control, setting standards. And then, I took my kids out camping when they were little. And we slept under the trees. Dad, don't we need a tent? No, we're soldiers. A tent just traps us. There's no rain tonight. There'll be a little dew. We're under a tree. And we slept out
Forget
under
about
the
stars.
And they said, well, something might sneak up on us. Well, a tent will protect you from that. And listen what's out there. Listen to all the leaves out there. We can hear anything that comes up to us. They're scary things in the night. It's us. Your dad is the scary thing that walks in the night. We've got a book out, Sheepdogs. And it's a book about making the decision to be a sheep or a sheepdog or a wolf. We don't want to be wolves. We don't want to be sheep. We want to be sheepdogs under the great shepherd. Both my book on spiritual combat and our children's book, Sheepdogs, Meet America's Warriors, we talk about raising this resiliency, of being sheepdogs under the authority of the great shepherd, of having a spirit of a protector, spiritually protecting. And remember, in this great spiritual battle, prayer is one of the greatest tools that we have. I tell a story in the book. Is a Korean War. An American unit launches an attack, an enemy hilltop position, withering enemy fire, driven back to the base of the hill. Partway up the hill is a wounded American soldier crying out in pain. The base of the hill, a young soldier looks at his watch, does nothing. Another soldier scrambles up the hill to rescue his friend, is gunned down, just merciless enemy fire. The soldier looks at his watch a second time, does nothing. Another soldier races up the hill to rescue his friend, gunned down. Finally, the soldier looks at his watch one more time, takes a deep breath, and scrambles up the hill. Gasping with fear and exertion, he grabs his friend. They scramble and roll down the hill, safety at the base of the hill. The medics come to treat the wounded. The commander walks up and said, "That is the bravest thing I've ever seen." He said, "No, sir, it wasn't." He said, "Two men just died trying to save that man. How can you say the brave?" He said, "You don't understand. My grandmother in Chicago goes to bed every night at 9 o'clock on the nose and prays for me. I was waiting for 9 o'clock, Chicago time."
Oh, beautiful.
So never fail to hold our children up in prayer.
Praise God. That's incredible. You once said, I heard you say this, that faith is a pillar of resilience. And so when we walk by faith, not just by what we see, what we experience, the current climate in the world, it really does make the world a difference. And so getting sleep for yourself, your kids, and being rooted in your faith makes a world of difference. Lieutenant Colonel, I look forward to having you back again here on Trending to continue on with our conversation. You can check out his books. We'll link to them at relevantradio.com/trending in the show notes. He has a book, Spiritual Combat, along with On Killing and Violence in Video Games. That book is amazing, which is titled Assassination Generation. I'll be right back here on Trending, and we're going to be discussing, has there been a baby boom or a baby bust since COVID?
Timmerie will be right back. You can reach her on Instagram and Twitter at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, apparently I am not part of this statistic here because I had a COVID baby, okay? December, 9 months, you do the math. Here's the reality. People have been asking the question, will there be a baby boom or the baby bust? My guess and my hope was that we would see a baby boom. More people home, not a lot of activities to engage in, we're holding our loved ones tight. You can imagine. Well, we've actually seen statistics are starting to come out from Italy, Germany, France, Britain, and it has been a baby bust. Italian births fell by 22% in December, exactly 9 months after we went into the first lockdown for COVID. That's a sample of just 15 cities there in Italy. We've seen similar trends in Germany and in France. For example, in Germany and France, people are being polled and they're actually saying that they are delaying having children, while Italians are actually saying that they're abandoning the ship of parent life and kids altogether. In fact, in 2020, Britain recorded a plunge in imports of baby carriages. Very interesting, random thing to kind of look at, but this is something that's not that surprising. In fact, I had a client of mine, I teach Pilates, and her husband was a high-level executive with Toys R Us. And guess who went out of business? Toys R Us. And even in their public statement, even in the conversations of this executive from Toys R Us, why? Less babies than ever before. We are below replacement rate here in the United States, most of Europe, most of the developed world. It is a very interesting time to see this change in terms of having babies. Now, I come at this from multiple perspectives. First and foremost, we need to remember that in the face of COVID and everything that's happened over the last year, unfortunately, this has meant an increase in the number of men and women who are post-abortive, who have chosen to have that abortion because they thought, because of financial circumstances and the economy and everything that's happened, that they had no other option. Or perhaps it was an excuse. And I hope that people begin to change their minds as they face unplanned pregnancies and fear and what they perhaps view as failure in the face of a challenging job market and situation. But they will only see a light at the end of the tunnel and have hope and faith if we, as people of faith, continue to take that stand, continue to support people who are in challenging pregnancy situations, who could possibly be in challenging circumstances. This is why our crisis pregnancy centers and sidewalk counseling in front of the abortion clinic is more important now than ever. Yet so many people have been afraid from being in front of the abortion clinic on the sidewalks. In fact, at the beginning of COVID, we heard horrible stories about how, in fact, people were being arrested for praying outside during COVID when they were following all the rules. Social distancing, masks, you name it. So remember, 40 Days for Life, the Lent version of 40 Days for Life, 40 days of prayer and fasting for the unborn. This is your opportunity to help get back out in front of the abortion clinic. Pray. If you're a sidewalk counselor, don't hesitate to dig in. Train other people to sidewalk counsel. Pass on the gift you've been given in sidewalk counseling to help train up the next generation and new people who can be out there at a time that you cannot be. I know we have so many faithful, long-term sidewalk counselors who listen to Relevant Radio. I'm asking you, help build up more people to be out there. Help so that there is a final resource between that woman and entering into the abortion clinic. And perhaps you're not a sidewalk counselor. Perhaps you're uncomfortable with confrontation, with any sort of, difficult situation surrounding the issue of abortion. 40 Days for Life, all you have to do is stand there and pray. You don't have to hold a sign. You can hold your rosary or hide it in your pocket if you want. All you have to do is be there and pray. And I've run a number of 40 Days for Life campaigns. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to who were terrified to go out in front of that abortion clinic for the first time, but they did it. And they saw it's not violent. It's not aggressive. It's their right to be there on the public sidewalk. And they would see, as people would drive past the abortion clinic waving, they would see lots of people honking and smiling because they support you. In fact, I see more people, even here in Southern California, who are supportive rather than in opposition to sidewalk counselors and pro-life advocates in front of the abortion clinic. In addition to that, know that you are not alone with 40 Days for Life. There are other people there. So if you're afraid, it's an opportunity to do something in community, in numbers, and in safety with other people. Another perspective on this baby bust from the last year is that it's a challenging moment for us as Catholics, people of faith. What does the church teach about contraception, abortion, and so forth? We know that abortion is intrinsically against our faith, and I don't often make the faith argument, but it's to kill. And whether we're participating in any way, that it goes against the 10 Commandments. In addition to that, we have the contraceptive attitude. Well, people say, well, maybe you should just go on contraception. Well, contraception can also function as an abortifacient, which also can end a life through abortion, or it can prevent sperm and egg from ever meeting. So it's important that people know the distinction and the fact that contraceptives, most of them, including the pill and most other popular forms of contraception, function both as a quote-unquote preventative and as an abortifacient, ending a life. And if it fails in preventing the new life from coming about, it could possibly function due to TMI, but mucus levels and hormone levels to prevent that baby from continuing to develop or implant where it ought to. So what does the church teach about spacing out children and about delaying children or perhaps not having more? Well, The church emphasizes that every intimate act between husband and wife should have two dimensions, that it should be unitive and procreative for the good of the spouses, but also that it be open to life. And so this is part of the reason why we don't support using contraception. Now, we could talk about this on a spiritual level, that when we close ourselves off to new life and the fruit that can come from the loving intimacy of a husband and wife, that there can be other types of attitudes where we start to use someone, where we do not allow the love of the couple, big picture, to actually grow beyond the two people. In fact, I've counseled so many women who have used hormonal contraception or barrier methods, and they even say when those have been a part of their relationship, they felt like more of a tool than someone to be loved, rather than for their loving relationship to grow and go beyond themselves, not just to be united as two people loving each other, but to be united in a mission, to care for one another, to actually care that contraception is harmful for women's bodies. And so perhaps you're someone who's saying, well, I need to possibly space out children. I'm not sure where my culpability is. Well, we have natural family planning that is an option, as Humana Vitae teaches, if for a grave reason you need to space out children. And ultimately, Humana Vitae lays out that this is between you and God at the end of the day. But many people need guidance, talking to a spiritual director, talking to their priest, speaking to their spouse, and getting other information sometimes on, is this a grave matter? Perhaps a job loss that allows for a temporary grave matter. Perhaps a very serious illness that for a time could allow that spacing out of children. But it's important that we don't think of NFP, natural family planning, as Catholic contraception. Because ultimately we're always called to have those two dimensions in every single marital act. That is to be unitive for the good of the spouses and procreative, that we're always open to the new life that could come about. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. I know sometimes we can get stuck in the weeds on this issue surrounding intimacy and children. So feel free to reach out, relevantradio.com/trending. I'd be glad to take your questions there. And you can always reach out to me on Instagram. My links to social media you can find right there. Believe it or not, Lent starts next week. So have you made your battle plan? Have you looked at what you need to detach from so that you can attach to our Lord in good habits? Well, we want you to have an incredible Lenten journey this year. So Father Rocky is offering Lenten Lessons on the Mass. When you sign up for Father Rocky's Lenten Lessons, you'll receive a daily email where Father will walk you through the different parts of the Mass. Each Lenten lesson allows you to read or listen to Father give a detailed explanation of certain aspects of our beautiful liturgy. Plus, you'll also receive a daily bonus video to accompany each Lenten lesson, with Father Rocky giving you a behind-the-scenes and more detailed look at the different parts of the Mass. The first Lenten lesson will be sent out Ash Wednesday. That's February 17th, so get ready and sign up now by clicking on the Relevant Radio app at the banner or at relevantradio.com. There's a study that I want to touch on. We'll discuss it a little bit more on Friday from Pew Research. And it's showing trends having to do with teenagers and their parents and what their religious lives look like when the two of them do or don't practice their faith. A couple of things that stood out is the fact is that Pew Research showed that most teens share the religion of their parents or legal guardian. About half of them say that they have the same religion as their parents. Interestingly, about 1/3 of teenagers say that they actually do not share the same beliefs as their parents and that their parents don't know about it. That was staggering to me. Although the majority said that they do practice the religion of their parents, the fact that essentially 1/3 of all teenagers polled do not practice the same religion tells me that there's a huge divide between parents and teenagers. Moral outlook on life, goals in terms of where we're going, where our end is. And so as we've been talking about young boys and we've seen this decline in the number of children that are being had in our culture, It shows the importance of instilling true values in teenagers, bringing our faith into their upbringing in a way that truly helps them to understand the purpose of being pro-life, the purpose of believing that marriage belongs between one man and one woman, and that intimacy belongs within marriage, helping them to understand why God matters, why we're created to be with him, why we actually believe that. This is so important, and this is why Monday's podcast, I highly recommend that you go back and you listen to the podcast. You can find it at relevantradio.com/trending. We talk with Kendra Tierney on that podcast, and she's all about that thing that I say all the time, that we need to live liturgically. But she actually discusses ways to do this in really neat ways with food and fun activities that you can incorporate throughout the year. So I want you to go back and listen to that podcast. You can find it online at relevantradio.com/trending. Dr. Stacy Trasankos will be with you tomorrow for our marriage hour. You can also check out my Instagram. I'm going to be posting about the Valentine's Day challenge on Instagram, sharing a little bit about my marriage and relationship. Also, I'll be back on Friday, so don't go away. Enjoy Stacy Trasankos tomorrow here on Trending.